We're not going to get very far with this, but you should probably read chapter 10. And this is what the chapter is about, basically. Proximate and ultimate causes of behavior. So, of course, proximate level changes, we talked about this before, they're the how things happen. What are the mechanisms behind it? Let's say immediate physiological changes and physical changes happening sometimes separately or simultaneously. And then, of course, the causes of why this male blue-cheeked bee eater produces vocalizations when communicating with other bees. Okay, so why is it doing this? I don't know why. I wonder what they sound like. Well, I'll have to look it up. Okay. So the same stuff at the same, or a little bit later, was Baptista and Petronovich with white-crowned sparrows. Baptista, he was from Monaco, and he was an amazing fellow. He's dead now, unfortunately, but he could actually sing all these different dialects from white-crowned sparrows, whistle them. Incredible. I obviously had an ear for it, like learning music and stuff, and he was able to produce it as well. And I remember going out with him a couple of times, because he used to love to go around and record bird song. So he came up to visit Humboldt State University when I was there, and we went out for, the morning song period just before dawn, when everything was singing, and did that. But he was hilarious too. He was a great guy, and unfortunately died at a very young age, like 50 or 55. But anyway, he showed for white crowns that there's a sensitive period. Now it says, however, after 50 days of learning could still take place in 70% of the subjects if a live bird was used, in other words, as the tutor, instead of a recording. Okay, so normally they have to hear between 10 and 50 days, but white crowns, if they actually hear a live bird, they can continue to learn. Now, the idea of social stimulation is important. So in other words, live birds are different than just recordings of birds. So a social environment can have a really strong effect on the critical period. And why white-crowned sparrows exposed to live tutors extend their critical period beyond 50 days. Okay. White-crowns also learn dialects as well. In other words, they have to learn beyond. But by this time, they've already got crystallized song. But they can modify that depending on where. And white-crowned sparrows, they're age-limited learners, except that the ones that actually migrate can start to match their song to, let's say, a different dialect, because they have all these different dialects, like humans do. And if you don't match the song to the proper dialect, you're going to be, an outsider. Okay. I mentioned at one point that they will not sing another bird's song even if they're listening to it. Well, that's not entirely true. It turns out they will under the right circumstances. So they did this thing with strawberry finches in the lab and white-crowned sparrows, young white-crowned sparrows. And they had the white-crowned sparrow caged next to the strawberry finch so they could see it and hear it. And then off stage, they had another white-crown that was an adult that sang. And it actually copied the strawberry finch. So there's kind of different levels of, if there hadn't been a strawberry finch, it would have gone and copied the white crown off stage. But the thing that is the strongest is actually hearing and seeing. And of course, that's what they're going to be doing in nature. It's unlikely they're going to run into a strawberry finch, right? Of course, there's other birds around at the time that they could key in on, but their father's going to be there. And so that's how you can actually override that if you put, let's say, a different species there. But it has to be both audio and visual. And then as far as, well, the previous thing, it was recordings and whether they listen to recordings the same way they listen to the live song. But it was mainly that the fact that you had a live bird that they could actually watch. Okay. Selective advantage of having a sensitive period. So we talked about this. Zebra finches, there's a premium in terms of age at first breeding. So in the harsh desert environments, the sensitive phase ends at 14 weeks. And I'm not sure. I mean, the trouble is there's not very much food there. So they tend to mature quickly, but that doesn't make any sense though, because they usually breed the following spring. I'll have to think about that. But there's obviously having a sensitive period can be an advantage, where you learn you're age limited, and then you don't really have to change after that, and it's set, and then you're ready to go. Whereas if you're changing, let's say you're copying the song of the local dialect, well, if it's important to do that, obviously that's great. But otherwise, if you're in a situation where you're never going to really need to change your song, that's kind of an extra pathway and sensitivity that a bird actually doesn't need. Okay, and then we already did that. Brood parasites. So this is a cowbird, and this is a male cowbird, but the female, a brood parasite, the female actually lays the eggs in another bird's nest, and then the other birds actually raise the cowbird chicks. And a lot of times it affects the host's fitness, like the birds that are raising the chicks. Many times they don't actually raise their own chicks successfully. Now, male cowbirds, since they're being raised by different kind of species and other species, many different kinds of species, they never actually hear their fathers sing. And they have kind of a template, but it actually is, they have delayed song learning period. And what happens is, once they've hatched, as they're yearlings, let's say a year away, they have poorly developed songs. But they start listening to other male cowbirds in the area, and that's when they actually acquire proper cowbird singing. And so they actually do have to learn, but they do it on, their when they're actually going to start breeding, they first have to learn from these other cowbirds that are in the area. Here's the development of adult song in brown-headed cowbirds that I talked about on a previous slide. So in the hatch year, in the spring, it doesn't actually show, do they memorize something? Probably not, because they're with a host and not with their, they're not listening to the normal adult song. So they probably have a template that they're in their head, and they practice sub-song and plastic song. And then by the first year, they have this crystallized yearling repertoire. And at the same time, they're listening to the local dialect that they're in for the in the breeding season for adults, males that are actually breeding, and their song. And then they develop basically a crystallized adult repertoire from that they'll actually be singing when they're actually breeding in the second breeding season. Okay, so this is kind of actually what's going on with brown-headed cowbirds. So they're born here. These are hatch-year birds in the spring. There's a question mark. Do they memorize other cowbirds during that time after they hatch? Probably not, because usually by that time the cowbirds have already bred, and the males really aren't singing that kind of song so much, but they're unsure about that. And then in the autumn, they start singing, it's probably from a template, the sub-song, plastic song that we've already talked about in terms of the sensory motor phase, where they're practicing their song over and over again. And then the next spring, this is the first breeding season, they end up with this crystallized yearling repertoire. And then they also hear the dialects of the males that are already there, and start doing they finally practice and then start producing a crystallized adult repertoire. The thing is, as we mentioned earlier, there's this social business that's going on as well. Songs of cowbirds are shaped by male-male interactions, by female responses to the song. So these social interactions. Now, it turns out that when young cowbirds are on the first breeding season, they have to be careful, because if they sing a really loud song, the more mature adults that are already there are going to jump on them. And so they don't quite do that. Let's see here. Okay, so in effect, the interactions with the dominant males on the development of song cowbirds, males that do not have visual or direct contact with dominant males produce a more potent song. But when they're in actually the presence of adult males, they tone it down, because it's a stimuli, like a potent song is a stimuli for other adult males that, oh, you're on my territory, what are you doing here, right? And so they'll initiate an attack. So if they play, a poor song or less potent song, it doesn't initiate that sort of attack. So we have direct contact, visual contact, and then auditory and visual isolation. Let's see, so rearing conditions. And then this is actually how females respond. Females respond to both the auditory and visual in terms of what they have to see for precopulatory actual singing. Auditory posture in females, auditory and visual isolation. and then visual isolation, visual contact, and direct contact. So these are the different kind of rearing conditions that initiate the strongest response. So it seems like when males are have been brought up isolated, they actually, that song and the way they sing it is actually the strongest stimuli for the females. So here's this female influence. Male cowbirds modify their songs in response to females' display. They do this little wing stroke. I'm trying to do it, but I'm not very good at it. But anyway, that's how a female tells a male or communicates to a male that, oh, she finds his song good. And then males change their songs to solicit a female's display. So if they start singing and the female is like dissing them, they start trying out new things. Pretty much what, human males do. If the first initial response doesn't get a reaction that you want, then you try something else. Maybe you do bong hits, or you do, what is it when you stand on your head and chug a beer? What? Yeah, right, okay. Yeah. I might have done that a long time ago, I don't remember. But one thing I do want to note that subspecies A males housed with females of their own subspecies do not sing any subspecies O songs, but those housed with subspecies O females sing subspecies O songs predominantly, but they'll also do A. So it's kind of like A-B blood types, I guess, something like that. No, it's not like that at all. But you get the picture. Okay. So this whole section is kind of on the social influence in terms of song development and then song behavior. And, of course, these are all proximate mechanisms. Okay. This is the phylogenies. I mentioned earlier that there were 3 different taxa that where birds actually sing. In other words, then they mimic songs, they have advanced, more complex songs, things like that. There was an original phylogeny. So this is the original phylogeny, and it showed, in fact, that let's see, 1, okay, 2 and 3. There were, let's see here, yeah, okay. Here there were 3 different changes for each of these 3 groups, and then, but the actual phylogeny with more recent stuff is this. So it shows that parrots and songbirds are much more closely related. And so when we actually had singing, it looks like in the common ancestor of those 2 species, they had song and advanced song and song learning. And then the hummingbirds were off by themselves. Hummingbirds actually make most of their songs by their feathers. When they go through these big displays, kind of J-loops and stuff, and so when they're screaming down, the feathers make a certain kind of sound. I remember once watching a merlin, which is kind of like a little falcon, and there was these, let's see, what was it? Rufous hummingbirds doing their thing. And this merlin he was just sitting there, and then they'd come in and display, and he'd come in and pick one off. And, you know, they're like little tiny things. It was kind of like candy, I guess, for the merlin. And these guys, male hummingbirds, they're fierce. And so they were completely clueless about what was going on. They were, they had a display for the female. So, now let's see here. Okay. So this is the actual phylogeny that we saw. And hummingbirds, they got an ancestor that they were able to do song, but the other ones, they shared the most recent common ancestor. So it was just 2 changes instead of 1. In other words, parsimony. Everybody, what does parsimony mean in terms of phylogenetics?
The least amount of steps.
Huh?
The least amount of steps.
Huh?
With the least amount of steps.
Yeah, exactly. So, simplest explanation in general, and then in terms of phylogenies, the fewest number of steps. Doesn't mean that that's actually how it happened, but it's a good place to start. So instead of having a more complex model, if you can have a simpler model, better to go that way. Okay. Now, the brains of these different birds are slightly different, but so we can, let's see, VAAH. Okay, so that's right. So hummingbirds have this whole structure over here. It's homologous, but it's slightly different because it was independently originated, and so it's the same sort of kind of structure, but the different compartments are different. So even though VAH and VAN and VAP, we don't see that in these other ones. There's homologous corresponding structures. And then, as we can see with the parrots and the passerine songbirds, their brains are much more similar to each other because, of course, they have a more recent common ancestor. So in those 2 groups, there was an ancestor that eventually divided into both. And then, let's see. Oh, it says here, vocal learners versus non-vocal learners, or vocal non-learners. So all these other birds, like storks and gulls and all that, they make sounds, but they don't learn sounds. They have a kind of a template that they always follow. They make the same song all the time. So what are some of the ultimate reasons, or why might birds learn song? What kind of function might they use it for? Anybody?
To attract.
Huh?
To attract another sex.
Okay, so obviously attracting another partner. What else?
Warnings.
Warning. Okay. Who are they warning?
Their family.
So another male. A lot of these birds, a lot of songbirds, not all of them, but a lot of them set up territories. And so they sing back and forth, the males do. It's kind of like, oh, that's Joe over there, I know who he is. And he's not trying to copulate with my Annie, so he's okay, right? But if there's a lot of times there's these other birds that don't have territories. they're usually less dominant birds, and so they have to use a different strategy, and so they oftentimes are sneaking around between territories, seeing if they can, catch a copulation or two. Of course, if the male sees them, then he's going to use the song, like, "Oh, buddy, you're done," and he's going to chase them away. So, territorial defense. Song learning may have evolved as a means of transferring complex patterns of behavior from one generation to the next. So instead of having everything fixed genetically, it's a lot easier if that's a lot of information to kind of store. And it's actually perhaps it's a lot easier that there's an innate part, but the rest of it is learned in terms of the actual ecology. Yeah.
Would these reasons be like analogous to the songs that marine mammals make? Like whales use songs, and that maybe it helps them identify their family group. Like
Exactly.
Population
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah. So there's species recognition, then there's group recognition, especially if there's social species, things like that. And I mentioned, of course, song learning may function as a population, recognition, so that birds, of course, don't mate with a different species, where you would end up with low fitness individuals. In fact, this is called reinforcement. So it's a precopulatory and prezygotic barrier between different species. So if the male, let's say, sings a specific song to a female of his own species versus a female of a different species that's maybe closely related, he'll get the correct response from his own female, but the other female will probably look at him like, "Don't stop following me around," or something like that. Okay? So that's part of reinforcement that you guys probably learned about a long time ago. You don't remember, but there were precopulatory and prezygotic barriers, so that's groups of birds that are different species don't breed, and then of course there's postzygotic sterilization or inviable offspring or things like that. Obviously, we're going to deal with this more when we talk about animal communication, but this is communication, and so you're automatically dealing with social interactions. Even if it's the males provide, let's say, absolutely no parental care. There's a lot of different groups of males or taxa where the males, all they do is they display. The females decide who to have sex with, and then the females go off and raise the offspring themselves. So quail, grouse, all the kind of chicken-like birds do that. Peacocks, and then also there's a lot of different species, manakins in South America. Yeah.
So would the bird want a song dialect that is the most different from its own? Because I read kind of that people are attracted to other people with accents because it shows that they are from somewhere different than they were born.
Yeah,
So
but have you ever lived in a place like a really small town where how do they deal with strangers? Are they open to strangers, or are they generally cautious?
Cautious?
Yeah, I mean, like let's say you go and move to Hawaii. You're a haole. And you're probably going to be a haole for like at least 20 years before they finally say, "Oh, well, I guess he lives here." He's not quite a local because he wasn't born here, but he's part of the landscape and we accept him and it's okay. But in the beginning, it's like, forget it. You know, they're not going to deal with them. And so you might be right. You might end up with a situation, let's say, where a female decides, well, let's say you have males, the male has a red spot on its head. And another male comes in with a blue spot from an adjoining population that at one point they shared a common ancestor. And usually the males of that area will, the females will respond to the red spot. But it might be, like you pointed out, that let's say one female or two females or whatever actually think, well, I'm getting tired of this red spotted guys. This blue spot looks interesting, right?
That's assuming they're still in the same species, right? They're
Yeah.
just different, like maybe different subgroups or whatever, but they
Right.
can still provide healthy
Perhaps.
offspring.
The idea is when there's hybrids, the idea is normally that hybrid offspring are usually lower fitness, but that's not necessarily true at all. They've found lots of cases, in fact, where hybrids, instead of actually causing the two populations to merge, create a third species because of new genes coming in to the original population. And think about it this way too. We learned earlier about what are called supernormal stimuli. So earlier there was a picture of a goose with a gigantic egg, and the goose responded much more to the gigantic egg than to an actual normal size egg. And then the bull that wanted to copulate with a motorcycle, all these kind of supernormal stimuli. So there's a basis for that too. Good point. So the fact that song is learned results in regional variation. So this is where learning that continues on provides an important function, because if someone disperses to a location where there's a different dialect or whatever, obviously if they can't start singing the right dialect, they're not going to have any success whatsoever. Hold on a second. Shoot, I'm not sure which one it is. Okay. thing. So here's the different ones. Berkeley, Sunset Beach, and Marin, that's who it was. Okay, so all in the Bay Area. You can actually take a look at the different dialects. And they all have the basic structure, but we can actually see that here there's kind of a whistle, right? Whereas here there's kind of 3 different notes. Then there's this right here, and this that is kind of shared, but this one doesn't have it. So they all have kind of different actual dialects. Now, there's this guy named Peter Marler who first started thinking about this. Depending on where a bird lives, certain sounds carry better than others. So, let's say thinking back to your marine mammals. Marine mammals have certain sounds that they make that, like whales, can actually make these very, very low sounds that travel tremendous distances, thousands of miles, supposedly. If it was a high-pitched sound that they were using, it wouldn't go very far. Okay, so it depends on the medium that a sound is actually made and whether it's useful or not in terms of what the animal is trying to communicate. So, also, animals use different sounds for different circumstances. How easy the source is to locate. So, short notes with broad frequency ranges, harmonics, are pretty easy to locate. They're good for attracting conspecifics. Long, high-pitched pure tone notes are difficult to locate, and they're good for warning conspecifics without being detected by, let's say, a predator. In fact, what's convergent evolution?
You go for it.
When they are evolving at the same time.
What that?
Convergent, like they evolve at the same time. They're going, like 2 trees kind of go.
Are similar,
Yeah.
right? Do they have a common ancestor or not? No, exactly. So you end up. This is an example of convergent evolution. If you listen to the warning calls from a whole different group of species, a lot of them all sound the same, even though they're different species. It's because I guess we got that to do. Yeah, well, we're not going to. We're just going to keep going. Okay. So there's only certain sounds that make it difficult to detect. One of them are these high-pitched pure tones. And so if you can actually, I've got examples, I think, of robins and chickadees and a whole bunch of different species that all make the same sorts of sounds. And that are different, they're difficult to detect where they're actually coming from. And then there's, recently they've started to demonstrate the fact that a whole community in a forest, let's say, if a predator comes along, when one individual picks it up, they make the warning sound. Well, if other individuals besides their own species are actually responding to it. So you can actually have, different classes. So birds doing it, and then squirrels pick it up, and then suddenly you can actually hear it almost coming towards you. All of a sudden there's this kind of racket that's coming in, and it gets louder and louder, and suddenly everybody's running for cover. It's just kind of amazing. So depending on how far the song will travel through the environment and how much it will be distorted traveling, So low frequency sounds travel further. You've probably heard about elephants. They make these very low rumbling sounds that transmit over miles of habitat. Simple tones are best for dense habitats because you're going to end up having a retraction and kind of sound breaking up. Complex songs with lots of temporal structure work well in open habitats, right? So there's these different habitats that are kind of selected for in different groups. Let's see here. I know where it is. Okay. Damn it, where is it? Damn it. I know I have it somewhere. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is called a great tit. It's related to our chickadees here.
If you hear a bird song you can't identify, the chances are it's a great tit. The males have an astonishing variety of calls and songs, which they use at different places in their territories, probably to persuade rivals that there's more than one bird about. The songs are usually simple, metallic sounding, and often very loud and persistent, and they still manage to fool me sometimes.
Okay. And now, stop. Hold on. Okay, that's it actually turns out, though, this bird is fairly widespread across Europe. and North Africa. In other words, they breed all over the place. But the thing is, these different populations sing different songs depending on the kind of habitat they're in. So if you actually look, let's say Sweden, Norway, England, where let's say there are dense forests, they all look kind of like these simple pure tones, because that's actually what will actually carry in a dense habitat. But in these open woodlands, you can hear much more complex songs adequately, and so that's what you normally hear there. So Peter Marler actually showed that this goes for a whole bunch of different species in various kinds of habitats, that you always find certain songs and song types in certain habitats, which is just a matter of physics, really. Obviously, in addition to attracting mates, territory is really important. Birds that are, we'll say, monogamous, where a male and a female usually bring up offspring. The best territories, we'll say, are usually taken by the dominant males. And oftentimes you'll find that they come back to the same territory year after year, unless one dies and then someone else takes it. So song can also not only indicate this is my territory, it can also indicate territory quality. So a female, usually females show up to a territory after the males first establish a territory. So they get there first if they're migratory. They pick their territory, maybe the one they've had for a long time, and then the females come in and decide based on the song, and also, well, the song tells you a little bit about the territory. Or it might just be who she mated with the year before. And then territory tenure, in other words, how long has a male actually had a specific territory. And they know these things because you can actually go out and you can map territories of, let's say, a species in an area. You can actually hear all the different males singing on their territories, and you can actually, in a sense, map them out. You know, you use landmarks and you put it on a grid line or whatever, and you can actually show the different territories. And then if you do an experiment like, let's say you do remove a male and you want to see what happens to that territory, sometimes a new bird will take over, or an adjacent territory will expand into it. And you can actually map all that out. And you can also then tie that in with DNA fingerprinting to perhaps see who's fathering the most offspring. So even though males and females are in a monogamous relationship, there are certain males in that area that are the ones that all the females will run off to have extra pair copulations with, because they're supposedly have better genes, let's say, because if their song tells them specific information about their quality. What's going on here? Okay. Let's see, I think I might be able to. Oh, here we go. So this is let's put this up here. Okay. Using song to defend territory. You can actually test this by using playbacks. So if you want to call in a male from a certain territory, you do a playback of another male, and you can actually see which male actually comes into that territory. When I was doing a master's degree, I was doing some stuff on varied thrushes, and so I had to, we were trying to put colored bands on their legs so I could identify them. And to call them in, we had a little varied thrush that it was stuffed, and then we used a playback. His name was Harold, the stuffed bird. And Harold did a very good job, but the varied thrushes that would come in and they'd peck on Harold's head. And Harold eventually started having a drinking problem. So later on, you could actually go to the various bars up in Arcata and Eureka, and Harold would often be at the bar drinking a lot because he was pecked a lot, and he didn't have any way to really respond. Okay, enough of that. So these are some experiments that John Krebs was with great hits. They were looking at territorial males who were caught and removed, and their songs replaced with a sophisticated system of loudspeakers patterned to mimic the normal singing behavior of the males. And then they had a couple of different controls. So they had one of the controls was playing a penny whistle instead of actually playing a song. Another was a silent control. And then, let's see. So if we actually look here, these are the territories. Oh, Christ. Okay, these are the territories that were actually occupied beforehand. And then, let's see. I forget. Hold on a second. I'm trying to remember what they exactly did. Okay. No, I guess not. Okay. Anyway, experiment was reversed control for territory equality. Both types of controls had territories which became occupied. Those with speakers kept other males out. So that's what it was. Okay. So control silent is the one where there's no sound. Control sound, that's penny whistle. And then experimental is with the speakers. And so if you actually look at it, here's the experimental. And that territory is still maintained. And similarly, with this experimental, in fact, this one looks like it's actually been expanded. So when there's no control there, of course, or there's a control, but it's not actually the song of a male, usually adjacent males either come in or they and expand their territory, or they new males come in. So as we're talking here mainly about territory, and when males are singing to males, depending on who the other male is, they can respond differently and sing different kinds of songs. So if we actually look at here, we have on the bottom, we have the focal bird that we're interested in, and then a neighbor, and then what the neighbor does, and then how the focal bird actually responds. And then we can see we've got aggressiveness up here. So if the focal bird sings an unshared song, the neighbor does the same sort of, if it sings a shared song, then the neighbor, let's say, sings an unshared song. If it sings a shared song and the neighbor sings a repertoire match, the focal will either sings the type match or switches to a different song. So more aggressive, it does a match to what it's hearing. Like, okay, you want to escalate, I'm ready. Or it decides not to. And then if it sings a type match, so there's repertoire matches, different birds have different repertoires, singing different songs. So it might have a whole bunch of different songs that it sings. And if it's one of those, this is what happens. But if it's actually a type to the same exact song, either, depending on, if the neighbor sings that, depending on where the focal bird is in terms of dominance, the focal bird, if he's a dominant individual, will stay on the same type and respond aggressively. Otherwise, if he feels like the neighbor is actually number one, then he's going to de-escalate. So, the focal bird is the one, the male that we're concentrating on. If the focal male, let's say, is a subdominant bird, and it knows it, and it doesn't want to get into a fight, In other words, doesn't want Pete to come along and peck on its head. It's going to sing an unshared song that tells the neighbor, Pete, hey, I'm fine. I know you're the number one. Okay? Now, if the focal male is, let's say he's a dominant, and he sings a repertoire match, and they sing a match type, he comes back with a match type. He's saying, okay, I've escalated up to this point, but, you know, if that's good enough, then that's good enough, right? And they won't go on to a full-on fight. But if the neighbor actually responds and sings the exact same song as the focal, well, that's kind of like two big elk going at each other. Okay? Now, they can immediately, one can decide it's a game of chicken. They can immediately de-escalate. So if this focal bird is actually not dominant, and he sings a type, the neighbor sings a type match, he's going to switch to a different song and de-escalate. But if, in fact, a neighbor sings this type match, which is being very aggressive, and the focal bird stays on it, well, they're in for a dust-up. Okay? So it's not so much about females as it is about adjacent males and how they're actually going to respond. Yeah?
Sorry, it's just,
It's okay.
so when it says the number of years that an individual male's sparrow holds his territory increases as the number of song types shared with his neighbor. So like the more songs that a songbird carries in his repertoire, the longer the dominant male is able to hold on to that territory?
Yeah, because he's got more and more songs. So obviously if he comes onto a territory as a new bird, he's not going to have very much repertoire. And he won't be able to respond in kind.
So they build up their repertoire as they go on.
Exactly. So you can then finally have, let's say, two old birds that know each other from a long time. Probably they're not going to get into a dust-up. They know each other. It's like, oh, we go out drinking together, and there's no sense in, escalating. But exactly, that sort of thing. Okay, so this is this is a brown thrasher. They're related to mockingbirds. This whole group tends to have a really large repertoire. In fact, what they do is a lot of them mimic the songs of other kinds of birds in the neighborhood. And so, if we look at this, eastern towhees, they're not related to a brown thrasher. They have, let's say, 3 to 8 repertory size, in other words, different kinds of songs. And then they might have different renditions that they switch to. Now, song sparrows or more is 8 to 10. Marsh wrens, wrens in general, are really songy. 50 to 150, mockingbirds 100 to 200, brown thrasher, like up to 2,000. I mean, they're all over the place. It's kind of magnificent when you hear them going off. Actually, it makes you crazy after a while. But like you mentioned the lyrebird, or did someone mention the lyrebird hidden here? The one from Australia. Well, it makes the sounds of all the different forest birds.
Oh yeah, that's the lyrebird.
Yeah, right, yeah. So that's an example. I mean, it's got a tremendous, I mean, it'll make the sounds of a chainsaw, camera drives, all sorts of different things. So variation in repertoire size can tell first of all, it varies by species, but then it also varies within a species in terms of what kind of a individual that individual is, whether it's dominant or not. And whether, now these guys that have a big repertoire, what kind of learners do you think these are? Age limited or open-ended? Yeah. Open-ended is, in fact, normally, well, they'll learn, but they'll take stuff from all over the place, including not their own species. And repertoire size, like I mentioned, will give other individuals, they're communicating like, oh, this guy's been around forever. He's singing all different types. Territories to display from, and the satellites are not so good. And the females are gathering around, and then they decide who they want. So in that respect, it's exactly like that. Okay, or they can actually do side by side. Is that what you meant, or?
Yeah, I'm just curious as to what would be the advantage of switching to a different song if it's just other than to just they're going up to a fight, he chooses a different song to de-escalate and like, okay, I'm going to not fight. What is the advantage of that?
Oh, well, let's say there is really a hierarchy, and you know that, Harold over there is a subdominant bird, and Pete over here is a dominant bird. Well, Pete, if Harold doesn't back down immediately, then Pete's going to escalate. And if Harold still doesn't back down, then he's really going to escalate. But normally what will happen is, because Harold sits as a subdominant bird, it'll be a de-escalation immediately, right? So there's no reason to actually respond. So a lot of this stuff kind of precludes a full-on fight. Why fight when you can actually get the message across without the possible fitness loss, namely getting injured, than when you don't have to. Is that what you're looking at, or do you have any other questions? Yeah, explain.
There's just a lot of links, so I'm trying to understand this adaptive, and then.
Let's go back. Let's see. Okay, so there's we start over here. For repertoire size and years on the territory, there's a significant increase. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it's definitely significant in terms of the longer, the more time you're on a territory, usually the size corresponds with that. The same thing with the number of shared songs. So in these guys' song sparrows, you can hear them, they're very common, and you can hear a whole bunch of different territories around you and different males singing. And again, years on the territory, the number of shared songs. So if you have few shared songs versus another bird that has a lot of big repertoire size, then it indicates that you haven't been on the territory very long. It's like you might be a new bird. And then, let's see. I'm not sure. Hold on a second. Okay, territory tenure, the same sort of thing. You see this, the long year, the tenure, the the higher the size. So birds all, what other signals do birds use to indicate who they are and maybe what their quality is? Anybody?
Like wings, ready, display.
Visual. Okay, so they use both. In fact, sometimes they use them together, though other times they don't. Like birds that use primarily song are wrens. Wrens are these little small birds. There's all kinds of species. They have some of the most incredible song, but they're just little brown jobs, and they pretty much all look about the same. You have other birds that don't sing very much, but they use display. So let's see, I'm trying to think. Oh, well, the bowerbirds that we saw that make these bowers. It's not only their color, but also the bowers that they make. And then there's a lot of birds that actually do both. We have some warblers in this country that have really nice songs and then are brightly colored. Okay, so obviously, if a male can sing, let's say the length of how long a male can sing, does that tell a female anything compared to an individual who doesn't sing as long? Probably one has more energy, more stamina. Is that? I don't think you can usually cheat that. Like a bird that doesn't have as much stamina, he's going to try to go as long as he can, but it's like there's a point where he just drops out. So that's a handicap principle. That's an actual honest signal to those around. Frogs do the same thing. Not only do how long the frogs sing, but also how rapid the different sounds are. So if a bird can sing for a long time and do the same, let's say, note over and over and over and over again, that also indicates the same sort of thing. And then repertoire size, the same sort of thing. It's one of those things that you really can't, well, it's been shown that you can't cheat. Certain birds, usually older birds, have greater repertoire size than others, and then even among age groups, there's intra-age variation going on. Females, well, they want honest information. And so some are going to like a fast delivery. Some are going to like long songs. Some are going to like a fast delivery and long songs over and over until one of them drops dead. And then, more frequent singing and repertoire size. So all these things are part of honest signals. Now, honest signals, remember, cannot be invaded by a cheater. That means another male cannot come along and do the same thing, even though he's really a sub, he's not really a very good male. If, in fact, these signals were not reliable signals that the female could use, then the signal that she was, let's say, responding to that a cheater could suddenly make, it would start to degrade, and eventually over time, she wouldn't respond to that at all. Okay, so as long as it's not invadable by a cheater, then it's an honest signal of, let's say, of some aspect of male condition. Whether the male is healthier, perhaps he's on a better territory, so he has more food, anything like that. Some of it can be obviously genetic, but they're all reliable signals that cannot be invaded. And it's part of what's called the handicap principle, which is, in a sense, the longer, let's say, you can sing, it shows that you've got the energy that you can actually waste. It doesn't really affect your fitness, whereas another guy can't do that. He falls apart within, a few seconds or whatever. So this is the handicap principle. Whether it's plumage or song, or there's some birds that practice what we would call altruism, but it's not, it's status, where dominant birds give subdominant birds food as kind of showing the goodness of their heart. Well, it's really not that. It's like they're saying, see, I can afford to give you food because I'm just so great, whereas you could never do the other way around. And if the subdominant bird actually tries to do it, they'll get the shit kicked out of them. Okay. Okay. So, oh, I see. So this is days, first of all, repertoire size, and then days until first egg. So the bigger the repertoire size, the sooner the female is going to start laying eggs. Okay, some of the things that obviously this might indicate about a male. Energy reserves, strength of immune system, level of stress or deprivation during development, and this could influence song nuclei in the brain, territory quality, all that kind of stuff. So these are things that are honest signals in terms of the quality of the male. It doesn't always have to do with genetic. It can be due to the fact that one male has a better territory quality than another, and so has better food supply. So switching from birds to, let's say, yeah.
Wouldn't you still say that's genetic though? Because
What?
Wouldn't you still say that's genetic though? Because the resources would then express the genes are along that.
Okay, I'll give you an example of something that's not genetic. Lions. Okay, usually it's a couple of males that team up and come in and try to knock the dominant males off of a pride. Males that are on a pride, they're not really involved in hunting very much, are they? The females are doing all the hunting. All they do is they lay around, they eat, and they have sex. Okay? If you somehow luck out and get on the territory as a male, well, you have an advantage just because of your condition, forget about genetics at all. Now, obviously, you might say, well, let's say during a fight, but even during a fight, males that aren't a pride holder or trying to come in, they probably don't eat as well. They're probably not as in good a shape. So it doesn't necessarily always have to do with genetic quality.
What I'm saying was the addition of the resources could then improve the genetic quality, over time.
Yeah. I mean, it could. I mean, you might end up with a lot of these birds where the best territories go to the best males. In other words, the ones that have the best genes. They're more efficient at getting food. They're dominant towards other individuals around them, all that kind of stuff. So, but you can actually partition out, if you're actually looking at stuff, how much might be genetic and how much it might be environmental. Okay. Yeah, so this is much the same sort of thing. Good copiers versus poor copiers. And so good copiers, they display more often. Poor copiers, not so much. Winter wren, do one of those. What is this? Still not doing it. God, I hate this.
Can we get a new classroom?
What?
Can we get a new classroom?
Yeah, it'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Like, these chairs are so terrible.
I know, it is. I'll see what I can do. No, I mean, I used to have over in CR, it was great. You know, there was never this problem.
Should I write a letter? I'll write a letter.
Okay,
Who do I give it to?
biology office.
Sheree.
Everybody, just send them an email. Oh, there we go. Never mind. Okay. Okay. So this is the where am I again? There we go. Okay. It's not very loud. It's because it's pretty high. But if I slow it down to half speed. Okay. So this this is actually a little tiny bird about this size. I mean, it's tiny. You would think it would run out of air in no time, but of course they have a flow-through system, so they don't. But extraordinary, and a lot of wrens in general have very beautiful song, but they don't look like hardly anything. Oh, okay. see what happens here. Not very good. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Okay. I don't know where the fuck that is. Oh, I know what I'll do. Hell with it. Okay. I'll put it up on Moodle. But anyway, this is a tropical wren, and in this case, normally the male is the one who's singing. In this case, they do duets, back and forth to each other. So it's used for a bunch of different things. One is, of course, pair bonding. These birds set up territories, and I'm not sure if they pair for life, but I think they do. And then they also use it, of course, since they're on the same territory, they, just to check on each other. They also do it for territory defense. Let's see. Oh, let's say there's an interloper coming in let's say another female, or the male wants to go have sex with another female, the female will sing a song, indicating that she's not too happy about that. So there's that kind of thing going on too. I think, why don't we call that a day? We'll finish up the rest on Wednesday. You guys want to go over some of the study guide?
Yeah, let's see.
Okay. Okay. It's kind of a large study guide, but it kind of covers what I want you to know. It's not going to be so much about, remembering things to memory. It's going to be about thinking. So I'm probably going to ask some questions about the comparative method. Let's say, I'll maybe show a phylogeny of the different vole species, some of which are monogamous and some of which are polygynous. And I might ask you, is monogamy in, let's say, the prairie vole, is that the result of evolutionary history, or is it the result of adaptive evolution in terms of the circumstances that the species finds itself in? So, let's see, I can probably show.
Isn't it always a combination of the both, though?
No. So we have polygynous mating system. Okay, so polygyny is red, tends to be monogamous is blue, and then variable mating system. Okay. In terms of this phylogeny, which is the ancestral form? Right, polygynous. So look at the bottom of this phylogeny, right? So this is the base of the phylogeny. The ancestors to all these different rodents is a polygynous mating system, right? That means one male mates with a lot of different females. Males don't help with raising offspring or anything like that. Now, initially it was red-backed vole. In fact, if you go all the way up here, it looks like it's it's a new adaptation after it was lost. So from here on, the ancestors to this whole clade generally monogamous, but within that, so here we have my California Vole. There was a change, so really variable mating system. It might have been both, depending on the circumstances. That means it's pretty plastic in terms of that behavior. There was only one change there. Still, at this point, it's all monogamous, the pine vole. And then up here, for these two species, it's now changed back to polygynous. Okay, so if we're going to look at these guys, we're going to say, okay, this is because of adaptive evolution in this clade. Because previous to this, from here on, this node right here, all the others basically had what you would call a monogamous mating system. Okay? So that means you can say from this node on, the ancestral system is monogamy. And then this is a new system for these two species. But if you're actually looking at, let's say, the prairie vole or the sagebrush vole, well, the original ancestral system was in fact polygyny. It was lost, and it went over to basically monogamy. So from here on, this is it's adaptive for this whole clade until it either changed here or was lost and went back to polygynous. Yeah?
Yeah, I was confused. I was surprised that you said including because it said in the book, it said in order to see how the proximate and ultimate cause are intertwined, it is helpful to see, and then it describes like the whole.
Yeah, but I know, but you can actually, let's say you have, in this case, it's the kind of mating system, right? You don't have to explain in terms of adaptive evolution if the ancestors already had this mating system. It's something that's been in place for a long time. Your clade and related clades have basically inherited from a common ancestor. Okay? So I know that it's all intertwined. It's intertwined in terms of proximate, and then ultimately the mating system and how that affects fitness. So I'll show you how it's intertwined. Why might you have a polygynous mating system among one clade, but a monogamous among another? So why do you think a lot of birds are monogamous?
The mother and father have similar input into offspring.
Exactly. So they need both the mother and father to provide enough resources, everything they need, and not just the mother alone. That means that compared to, let's say, a species that's polygynous, where the female can do it all on herself, which environment is going to, in terms of the food environment, is more likely to have enough food or an overabundance of food? Polygynous, right? In other words, a male can increase its reproductive success because he doesn't have to worry about the female, right? He can go around and have sex with as many females as he can get his hands on. But if you're in a very, let's say, poor food environment, or where you need essentially both males and females, it might have to do with predation, whatever it is, where that environment fitness goes ways down with only, let's say, one parent compared to two. So the proximate mechanisms on that, first of all, it's going to be the food environment on how that affects the amount of food, and whether two will do, you need two or one parent, okay? And of course that'll affect how the males respond to vasopressin, the different changes in the genes, and whether they're more likely to form pair bonds with a female or not. But that food environment, of course, ultimately results in fitness consequences. And so if you come from a long line of where you actually find what the food environment is like, you can always see, oh, this species is always in a food environment where you require two parents to actually provide enough resources. Whereas the other one, you don't find that. Now it turns out, like the California vole, it's a variable environment. In fact, it's perhaps more widespread in more diverse habitats. In some habitats, there's enough food where a male can get by on being polygynous. In another environment, might not be enough food where they both need to be there. Okay, so in that case, it does feed back on itself, and it is a mixture of proximate. So proximate is how do they develop the appropriate behavior, let's say the appropriate mating system, the actual nuts and bolts of expressing it. And then ultimately, it has to do with the present food environment. Now, if the food environment for, let's say, one group of voles, it's always going to be found in, let's say, a relatively poor food environment, or there's something else in the environment that favors two adults, then that's the ultimate side of things. Okay? And it may be, it looks like here, obviously it was polygynous originally, and then it turned to monogamous, and then at certain period in different clades, it either stayed monogamous or it went over to either variable or back to polygynous. Okay? Now, okay, tell me what you, ask me questions.
I was just gonna, I'm just trying to, imagine if there was, a question or something on this, what would you kind of, that's why I was like.
Oh, yeah, okay, well, let's say I asked about look, if I gave you this phylogeny, or I didn't even have to, what kind of food environment would you expect to find in a monogamous species versus a polygynous species? Right? And you would say, well, if it was the food environment that was actually the selective force, then we could say that, in fact, it's the amount of food, the quality of the food that's actually available that's probably driving this. Like, that's a selective force. And that's going
natural selection would be a ultimate cause.
Yes, exactly. And then
or lack of food source can also affect their development, and that would be a proximate mechanism.
Exactly. Yep, that's right. Okay, so I could ask you something like that. Let's see. I might ask you something like, remember the sea eagles that do the talon lock, and they either use it in terms of an antagonistic display with competitors, or they do it as part of a courtship. Well, I might ask you with a talon lock, if it turns out all sea eagles use these displays. Okay, so we don't really know if it's only, is it also, let's say, we could ask, now is talon lock also found in other, let's say, types of eagles that are closer related to that whole group, or not? And it turns out other eagles do kind of do these displays sometimes, but not nearly as much as the sea eagles do. So it looks like, in terms of the whole clade of sea eagles, that's all basically from evolutionary history. It's part of, obviously, it's part of their genetics. That's how they deal with things. It's been passed on, and it hasn't really changed. You don't find any group of sea eagles that doesn't do it. They all do it. Okay, so there you can say it's in terms of the comparative method. This is talon locking and cartwheeling is actually a constraint. It's a kind of behavior that everybody's got it in the whole clade, all the different species, and in fact, not doing it is probably a very difficult thing. You might eventually find one group that perhaps gives it up. But at this point, it's actually like a phylogenetic constraint. That means everybody, all the different lineages in that clade are doing it. So it's like, think about tetrapods. Four-limbed vertebrates. Having four limbs is actually a constraint. You have very few lineages in which that's actually been lost, where four limbs have been lost. You have whales, and then you have snakes and a few lizard clades where it's been lost independently. But for the most part, it's a constraint. The developmental pathways are kind of entrained so that you always, each different lineage is always going to start out with some form of four limbs, whether they want it or not. So it's not like, oh, they can suddenly lose. And even even lineages that lose the legs, you can actually see, first of all, you can see transitional fossils, and then usually you can see vestigial traits that are still there. And the same thing happens actually with a lot of behavior. A lot of times you'll see behavior that is really constrained because of what the ancestors already did. So instead of something being automatically adaptive, no, it's actually because of evolutionary history and not present natural selection.
So when we're looking at their phylogenetic, like when we're using the comparative method, and we're comparing, are we comparing divergent and convergent evolution that way too?
Yeah, I mean, if I gave you a phylogeny, and so in terms of polygyny, is there any evidence of convergence where you have lineages that evolved independently, maybe a mating system on this? What? No, that's okay. That's not. No, that's all by itself, and it's kind of variable. And there's something else going on there.
What was your question again?
What?
What was your question again?
So, which clades on here show an example of convergent evolution?
Isn't it where you have the red back bulb that goes into the sagebush, the switches?
Yeah.
And you also have the pine bulb and the monza bulb, they switch off again there too.
No, what about up above?
That's why, doesn't it
Oh,
go
Montaigne?
from, yeah, it goes from
yeah.
a mono to
Right.
a poly.
Exactly.
And also
So-
from the ancestral, so the ancestral goes from poly to mono.
Right, exactly. So, she showed the original mating system for this whole clade was polygynous. It was then lost from here on. And from here on, it's in terms of this phylogeny, it shows that monogamous is kind of the dominant mating system for all these. Here it's variable, but then back here, this had to re-evolve. In other words, they had to go from monogamous to polygynous. So you actually have two different, it requires an extra, this phylogeny requires an extra change in terms of the number of times polygyny evolved. And so when you have convergent evolution, you have independent origins of the same sorts of traits. Right? So the ancestor to the red-backed bull, those were all polygynous, and then it was lost, and then it re-emerged or re-evolved in terms of this clade up here that included both those species. Okay, so that's convergent evolution. And anytime you see convergent evolution, that's an example of selection in action. Okay? It required evolution by natural selection here, because the environment favored this kind of a mating system. Whereas individuals that were using a polygynous mating system in that kind of environment would not leave as many offspring. Right? So you can actually, when you have convergent evolution, that's a good example of actually evolution by natural selection. When it's just inherited in part in terms of as part of the clade, it might still be favored, or it just might be an evolutionary constraint. All my ancestors did that. Whether it's actually fitness enhancing or an adaptation or not. Okay? You guys look, maybe? Got it? If you don't have it, let me know. So you can actually, that's the nice thing about the comparative method. You can actually, in terms of ultimate, so the comparative method, you're going to, when you're looking at a phylogeny, you're looking at ultimate mechanisms, causes. What are the selective environment that favors these different kinds of behavior? In this case, mating system. And if it deviates from that, let's say you have a certain kind of behavior that's really entrained, then and then you have a group that changes it, then you know that for this group there was some sort of new selective environment that favored certain types over another. So that's why when, remember we're talking about what's homology. Anybody remember what homology is? Yeah. So all tetrapods, 4 limbs, generally 5 fingers, not always. But if you look at the actual bones, the humerus and the carpals and the phalanges and all that, in all these different groups of quadrupeds, all those bones are used. In some cases they're much reduced, but they're all there. Those are homologous bones and development, okay? That means we know that from that those lineages are related to each other. You can do the same thing with behavior. You can have behavior that, let's say, remember the flies that made those balloons full of nothing? Okay. Now, if you actually go back into related lineages, you see all sorts of different things where, in one case, let's say farther back in time, a male would bring food to the female. In another, the male might wrap up the food and bring it to the female. And then in another lineage, a male will wrap something up, but it's not necessarily food. Just something you can pick up. And then the final one, the one that we were looking at, the male is just bringing a balloon and nothing in it. Okay? Well, that's all homologous behavior. We know we can actually use that kind of food giving or a facsimile thereof to actually map out the phylogeny. Now we'd want to use other things besides just that for getting a decent phylogeny, but you can map out those traits on that. They all started out with, let's say, food giving, you know, a nuptial gift. Every single one of them. It changed with various lineages, and you'll actually find in Helia, I forget what it is, Sartor, well, the genus, that some species, actually, there's a number of species that bring food directly to the female. There's some other species that bring, you know, something, balloons that actually filled with something that's actually food. There's only one.
Was that a deceptive signal, or?
Well, that's a good question.
I know you brought up honest signals.
Yeah, no. No, exactly. You're exactly right on. So, how come the female is not? I mean, it's not an honest signal. If the male's bringing, you know, nothing, he's bringing a nice package with nothing in it. That's not an honest signal. So, how come that signal doesn't degrade so that the female ignores it? Because she's being deceived. There's actually strong selection for her to recognize that, oh, this guy's a bozo, right? So what you brought up is very good. Now, I was thinking about this. The male puts in a fair amount of energy and resources into his silken balloon, right? Is there any evidence that maybe the female eats that? Now, it doesn't say that that's what's going on. It says that the female tends to play with it while the male is copulating with it. But, you know, maybe in fact the male is now providing the resources in the form of the silken balloon that the female can actually consume. Because there's a lot of other insects that actually do that. They provide, like, certain grasshoppers or crickets have a spur, and that's what the female chews on while they're copulating. Okay, so he's got this spur that's filled with all these kinds of different nutrients, and the female's eating it while they're copulating. And in fact, unfortunately, once he's copulated, future females don't find him as attractive because obviously his spur's been kind of ground down, right? So that's a very good question that you just asked. How come it hasn't disappeared? I don't know. Unless, well, I don't know. I don't know. It could just be that eventually, in the lineage where it's just the balloon, that eventually maybe it'll disappear.
Yes, as it could have evolved to ensure that they will not be eaten by females. So
Well, yeah.
that's way it can ensure their fitness, their...
Right. So if you actually look far back in the phylogeny, there's a lot of insects. The female eats the male. There's some crickets that do it. There's praying mantises that do it. There's perhaps these flies. A lot of spiders do it too. Okay. Now, in a sense, the male is the nuptial gift. The thing is, if a male doesn't get eaten, then he's got more mating opportunities. So how is it that he can avoid, getting eaten? Well, there's a spider called the redback spider. It's like our equivalent of a black widow. It's in Australia. It turns out that the chances of a male finding another female before he dies is very low. Okay? So, the fact that he might have brought a nuptial gift, it still wouldn't have done him necessarily any good. Right? So in those cases where the chances of finding another female to inseminate are so low, you can see that perhaps bringing himself as a nuptial gift is the best that he's going to do. I mean, not from his perspective. He's probably thinking, God, I'd rather not do that, but in general. But in this case, we've got these flies, and perhaps the initial, the ancestral state was that the females ate the males, or at least in a fair number of cases. Well, males that provided a nuptial gift didn't get eaten. They left more offspring, right? And so in that case, you've got a different selective environment where a males that can actually mate multiple times have a much higher chance of having offspring and passing on their genes. Okay, so you can actually look at that in terms of putting it on a phylogeny, looking at the chances of a male finding another female as one selected force or not, and then trying to explain that. Or now, it could be that this balloon thing, it's not adaptive anymore. It's just an evolutionary holdover. They kind of both go through the motions. The female, for some reason or other, doesn't, it doesn't matter to her whether she gets deceived or not. Perhaps she gets enough food on her own. She doesn't need anything. But it still stimulates her to actually have sex with a male. I don't know if there's variation in the silken balloon size, and whether a bigger one is more likely for the male to actually copulate longer with or not. It doesn't really say anything about that there. But it could be, it might have not everything is adaptive. We all tell these little stories about just so stories, like from Rudyard Kipling, about, well, this is why it's so. This is why it's so. It's always adaptive. Well, a lot of times it's not adaptive. A lot of times it's just that an evolutionary holdover that things that is maintained, even if it's not necessarily adaptive anymore.
So behavior can evolve without it having any benefit, like evolutionary benefit,
Sure.
fitness benefit.
Yeah. Let's say it's a behavior that has absolutely no, it's a neutral fitness. So it's like an allele where it doesn't code for anything, but it's a change in the DNA, but it's in a section that doesn't lead to any changes in proteins or anything like that. Well, those things change randomly. There's no selection on them. You could actually have a behavior that, let's say, changes, and it still doesn't affect fitness. Right? Now, if it does affect fitness, well, either it's going to be selected against or favored. But in fact, that's why you can often see with phylogenies, you have a certain behavior, and it may be nice to have a different kind of behavior, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen, because the evolutionary history constrains what kind of behavior can actually evolve. You oftentimes find instances where a function or an ability, a trait, loses function. So you have salamanders that are found in caves. They eventually lose their sight. Okay? But it's very rare that you actually find that lineage then eventually reconstituting sight. It doesn't happen very often. Okay? Now here it shows that it did with the montane and meadow voles in terms of polygyny, that But it sounds like this whole mating system stuff is at least somewhat plastic for some of these different lineages, because it actually shows, it turns out the prairie vole, in some instances, uses a polygynous mating system. So there might not be very many changes genetically, but it might be a regulatory thing, where you're in an environment, there's enough food. The amount of food perhaps is one of the cues that regulates the amount of vasopressin that's produced or not. And so it's not necessarily a genetic change, it's a regulatory change. Right? Well, I mean, that's speculation on my part. It might be not true at all. But I'm just giving something plausible, but not necessarily true. Okay? But the questions you're asking, they're right on. Those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be asking about in terms of, why is it that pigs don't fly? What's the best explanation for that? Evolutionary history. Pigs might want to fly. I've run after pigs and tried to catch them. They would have liked to fly back then when I could run fast. Now they don't care. Okay? Any other questions? Is that good enough for now, or? Okay, yeah, we've been here for a while. If you want to meet with me, I'll be in my office. We can also meet Wednesday after class. If you have any questions, start using the student forum for asking them. So instead of asking me, because I'll just probably ask questions back at you, you can put them out there. Okay? Oh yeah, everybody email the biology office about the fact that this is a shitty room.
All right. Anything else for next Monday?
What?
Anything else for next Monday? What are we doing?
Yeah, we're gonna have the test then instead of Wednesday. It turns out. Yeah, I'm giving them an extra day.
Okay.
Okay. Of course. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Probably what'll happen is what I might do is I'm trying to think. I might wait until you show up.
At 2:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
To give the test.
All right.
Okay. I'll see. I'll think about it.
All right. Let me know.
Okay. Yeah.
See you later.
Yep.
About perfumes. Did you get the breakdown of what the test is going to look like, multiple choice?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll send it out. But it's always going to be pretty much. There's probably going to be, I think, 5 multiple choice. There might be an extra one for extra credit. There's going to be short answer, probably 7 or 8, something like that. And then there'll be 1 long essay. Okay? Yeah. So, that's all.
How many points? 100 or?
Well, it's 100, but it's not really. It's I forget what it is. I'd have to look on the syllabus, because it's out of 100. The whole course is 100. So I don't know how it breaks down, but I'll be grading it on a 100-point scale.
So the multiple choice questions won't have as much weight as the...
No. I think they're going to be like 2 points apiece. It's going to be like 10 points out of 100. So it's 10% per loop. Okay?
I had previously scheduled the test was dressed, so I'm gonna have to change it to.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I was wondering what time would be okay, because they give me an extra 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I should move it before. I should start 30 minutes before the class starts.
It doesn't matter to me. Just tell them when you want to do it.
Okay, just 'cause I want to be back in time, or are you still gonna go ahead with the
Yeah, that's what I have to decide about whether
field
we're gonna.
studies on Monday, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I might. Probably not. We probably won't come back for anything.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, so I can start at the same time.
same time, yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Sorry about all the questions. I was like, oh god, people are gonna start getting mad at
No,
me.
no. Actually, those are the great questions. Absolutely, I guarantee you that 90% of the people in here were wondering the same thing, or they were wondering, oh God, I didn't even think about that. Okay, so no, that's absolutely great.
Okay.
I love it.
I studied a lot ahead, and then kind of stressing myself out, especially in the first exam because I don't know the format, and I just try to especially with writing questions and stuff. That's why I take it over and rest. So I have extra time to breathe, relax, and at least get the writing process all figured out.
Yeah.
Sometimes my thinking gets too rushed
Right.
and everything. So.
Yeah, I mean, and let's see, I think it was so it was an hour and 15 minutes is normal, and you should have
just 30 minutes.
well, a little bit more than 30 minutes. But actually, frankly, if you need 2 hours, I don't care. If you want, them to do that, just ask.
No, it's okay. I mean,
Okay.
I know part of it's multiple choice, so I mean, if it was all writing.
Yeah, but it's only five questions that are multiple choice. I mean, it's very little. Most of it's going to be writing. Okay, and mostly, I mean, like I said, 7 or 8 questions. Will this be kind of short answer, where you don't have to go on and on and on and on, right? And then there'll be only one where they'll have, let's say, a full page that you could actually write on it.
Okay, so the other one's maybe 3 or 4 sentences or something like that, and then the other one may be a page or so.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So anything that we can do to, lower the stress for you, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, in the future, if you wanted to, you could, let's say, take it after everybody else takes it in my office. That way you can take as long as you want, and then if you have any questions, you can ask me.
Yeah, that's another problem that when I take it there, I can't ask a question to
Well,
you.
I know, exactly. So I mean, that's why I was suggesting that maybe.
I guess that's why I ask a lot of questions here, because I'm I can't go up,
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, you can do it by yourself, where I'm available, and you can ask me questions. I might not always answer them, right? But I'm certainly there. That if it's something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, then there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to help you on that.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I think I'm gonna just give it a go and then see how I do, and if I'm not happy with the score, then I'll leave.
Okay.
Or not and see.
Okay.
But I have been preparing enough for it, so I don't think it's.
Yeah, I think you'll probably do fine. You seem like I mean, you're obviously putting in time, so because of that alone, and the questions you're asking are exactly the kind of questions people should be asking. So that tells me you're on the right track.
Yeah, there was a chapter on monogamy versus polygamy, are you going to be asking something
about that? I might. Yeah. I mean, there's a problem. I was thinking about something in terms of the comparative method on that or something. It's not a full chapter. But it's a section in Proximate.
I was starting to. This is how OCD I get during my studying. But I was going towards the midterm terms and then looking at which chapters, writing down which chapter, what page they were in, and then seeing what chapters in the book relate to, and then of course looking at the slides and that.
Yeah. Because there's some things in the slides that have nothing to do with the book.
Yeah. I was looking at the song learning, and then the whole thing about the parasitic,
Cowbirds.
those cowbirds wasn't
Yeah.
in the book.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, so where did he get this from?
Just stuff I know, you know. And it's the same, it's the same sorts of stuff that we're dealing with. It's mainly proximate mechanism, but you can also obviously understand from an evolutionary standpoint. Like, if the males never hear male song, what happens is they actually have to get on territory, or they have to go become, mature males, where they're going to end up breeding, and then they're going to start acquiring song. Even they don't have territories, but that's where they're going to. So they have this kind of, they probably have sub-song, but they actually do learn it, but they learn it from all these other males that are around.
And like under proximate mechanisms, it was talking about the neurophysiological mechanisms and then developmental mechanisms.
Right. Exactly.
And you can go gene expression, that's epigenetics, goes under both. Would that be evidence to support either of them, or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of epigenetics that goes on. We call it phenotypic plasticity, where it's the same genes, but how they're expressed. Then
Oh yeah, phenotypic variance.
Right. Well, the same thing can happen.
Variable expressivity.
Yeah. So what happens is, in terms of it, actually, a lot of times it's developmental plasticity. So early in development, a good example is these marine snails, and they get eaten by various predators like starfish, right? Well, there are some places where the snails are and there's no predators like that, okay? Whereas there's other places where there are. Well, it looks like where there's predators, the spats, the little tiny ones, there's chemicals in the water that are detectable. And it starts it on a whole different developmental pathway. And they end up with shells that are much thicker, and they look different. So it's much more difficult to break through. And then in areas where there aren't any predators like that, there's not that chemical signal, and so they grow a shell that isn't as thick and looks different. And then if you actually put the two together, you do a common garden experiment. Well, it turns out the ones that aren't preyed upon with this normal shell, they're competitively superior in terms of acquiring resources, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a cost to be paid, but obviously it's a cost it's a good cost, because otherwise you'd be dead in a predator environment, right? So obviously it changes, and it also changes their behavior. Snails, of course, in a predatory environment are using.
Yeah, that was one of the models, right? So there's the comparative method, cost-benefit method, and then there's game theory, which we didn't really go too
we'll
much
get into that next. Right, exactly. So it's called evolutionary stable strategies. Yeah, but yeah, it's a matter of trade-offs, like with developmental pathway stuff. Obviously, if there was no difference between one form of the the snail and the other, in terms of competition, well, they'd all go towards one phenotype. But there's a trade-off there. In one, you're more competitive, but if there's a predator around, then you're more likely to survive. So there's always that cost-benefit trade-off sort of thing that's going on. Or we haven't really talked about it too much, but optimal foraging. When you're foraging, when should you stay at a patch of food and keep eating, and at one point where when the food is depleted at one point, what point should you actually leave? Because you can't do two at once. So it's kind of, or same sort of thing, mating. Should you mate guard and so that no one else mates with you know, the female that's yours, or would you be better off catting around and mating with a whole bunch of females? Well, those are cost benefits. It depends on the environment, actually. And there aren't very many other suitors, and you really don't have to worry about it that much. And you can go off and do what you want. But it was likely that she can, let's say, store sperm and have many partners, and then decide, you know, physiologically which sperm to use. Well, you know, then you're caught in a bad place. Well, maybe I should stick around.
So the question's going to be more like you're giving an example and then we kind of address the topics, or are you going to put a topic and then we have to give something to support
I don't know.
it?
I'm probably both. Some things it just might be a definition, a short answer definition. And then some of it's going to be, what I'll probably do is I'll probably give an example, like I did with polygyny versus monogamy, and, you know, ask something about the selective environment and which would be favored in one environment versus the other. Or I might give you a phylogeny. It might be species A, B, C, and D, whatever it is, and then I'll, you know, map some characters onto that in terms of behavioral, and I can ask you about that.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
I probably have to like review just basic evolution stuff.
Yeah, no, I know.
Some of it is a little, you know, just fuzzy. I mean, I'm a lot stronger in like the genetics aspects
Sure.
of things. I've just taken medical genetics,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was my first, you know, 500 level class.
Mm-hmm.
So the evolutionary like developmental stuff,
Yeah.
phylogeny
No, I
is
know.
all like
Absolutely.
a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah, now when did you take evolution? How long ago?
Probably like 2 years ago.
Exactly, yeah. So you really haven't had much time, you haven't had to think about it all that much, right? And you're doing genetics, but, you know, we're really, you're down to molecular genetics essentially, and you know, biochemistry and all that kind of stuff. So there's, you know, you haven't had it for a while. That's why, you know, the first day of class I said, you've all had evolution, and you better start following up on it. So
Okay.
I just want you to start thinking about that again.
Yeah, I keep like old notebooks of all the classes. So I have my
Yeah.
own notebook from back then and
Yeah.
just review stuff.
I mean, when, you know, evolution, you have to start training yourself to think, okay, let's say you're thinking about costs and benefits and trade-offs. Well, okay, under this situation, what would be favored under this versus this? But if this is also going on, then what? You know, it's kind of like, let's say, optimal foraging theory. Should I forage in this patch, or should I leave and go to another patch? Well, that's a good thing to wonder about, but what happens if there's predators around? And where are the predators going to mainly be? They're going to be where you're mainly at, which is good patches. Okay, so how does that actually affect decisions that animals are actually making in terms of going on and foraging somewhere else, or not using an area at all? When the elk, when the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, they had been gone for 80 years, something like that. And so there were moose and there were elk. And all these moose and elk had grown up without predators. And they basically went where they wanted to go, right? Nothing was constraining them in terms of the food resources. In fact, they were eating themselves out of house and home. Like the watersheds were being denuded, all sorts of things. Well, you can imagine what happened when they reintroduced wolves. Now, the ones that were clueless, the elk or moose, they got eaten up right away. But there were some other ones, and then there were certain areas where it was a lot safer to hang out than in others. In fact, in some cases, it was safer to actually hang out in an open meadow. Sure, the wolves could see you, but you could also see them coming, versus, you know, let's say in a forest where they could perhaps, you know, like set up a trap or whatever.
Would that be a survival that would be like, would they pick off the least genetically fit, or would it be that kind of be like a random event, you know,
well,
like a catastrophe?
what do you think? First of all, they'd pick off individuals who are clueless. Okay, they would obviously have the lowest fitness. If there's genetics behind that, then that would affect that. And then, whatever is easiest for a wolf to get a hold of, that's what they're going to go after. If that's a young moose compared to an old moose, then, well, I'll tell you, when they're in calving season, is like, it's a bloodbath. You know, everybody's out, not just wolves.
If there's a new predator, they don't have any like strategies yet.
No,
you know,
in fact,
so there's no behavior.
In fact, a lot of times that's the trouble with like invasive species.
Yeah.
With a new predator, the population is naive to it. You know, and in fact, some of that is genetic. It's like, you know, you've got a long evolutionary history where these two taxa have never been. You know, a good example is on islands. When they, like Hawaii, they brought in mongooses because they had a problem with snakes. And snakes were eating the songbirds. And snakes were brought in too, you know, unfortunately. Well, songbirds, of course, never evolved with snakes there. So there was never evolution in, you know, where to put a nest that would be, let's say, safe from a snake. And then they brought in these mongooses. Well, it turns out the snakes were nocturnal, and the mongoose were diurnal.
The species into a bottleneck, wouldn't it?
What?
A bottleneck?
Well, yeah, there would be that too. But this is an example of where you have two taxa that their evolutionary history, they were never in contact with each other. And so, you know, the one, I mean, it might be that the predator wouldn't even view the other thing as food. Or if it did, it's that the prey, well, it never evolved any sorts of anti-predator defenses, whether it's, you know, physiological or anatomical or behavioral, you know. In Hawaii, there's also this other thing. There was this,
I know in the Amazon there was this new species of clam that was invasive, and there was an article talking about how they're going, you know, instead of how we usually deal with invasive species, you know, a pesticide or introducing another species which has its own, you know,
right.
costs and benefits,
yeah.
or a pesticide which may, like, you know, affect more than that given
sure.
species. They're trying to, you know, do it genetically by like coding for something that is going to turn off their.
Oh, okay.
You know,
yeah, right. So it's only species.
Or
yeah.
turn off something important in them that they won't be able to reproduce or be able to live or something
right.
like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You know, yeah, because what you want to do, of course, is you want to target the problem, and you don't want any collateral damage.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So hopefully that will be a new way to maybe take care of invasive species.
Without affecting everything else around it. Yeah.
It's only seemed to be like a temporary fix. If you introduce another species, then it's only temporary until the other species
usually you don't
gets
know
out
enough
of
about the
control.
other species. Either it doesn't take it all, or you know, it's like competitive release. There's nothing around there that would outcompete it, and so it's suddenly pushing everything out. And you have to know there's so many variables going on with that. You know, they use, a lot of times, like, they bring in some new disease or a pesticide. Well, you know, pesticide, like you said, is going to wipe everything out instead of just a specific, you know, insect, let's say. And so it's a disaster.
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable, like, especially with how many people are traveling now, especially through different countries. Like those clams or something came with ships in the bottom or something, and that's how they got into the Amazon River.
Invasive species, actually, probably about 90% of species that are non-native, they don't go anywhere. They just, there's no way they can take a hold because it's not adequate. The habitat is not, doesn't have the right attributes to support.
Yeah.
But
I remember a friend asking me like, oh, why aren't you like, I feel bad for animals in containment, like why don't they just set them free into the wild? And like, you don't even, like he's talking about a bed and just putting it in a little pond or somewhere, like there's no way it would even be able to survive. Like,
right.
You know, this is
no, I know, it's like, no, yeah, basically all you're doing is you're making yourself feel better, but it's going to have a miserable couple of weeks until it's dead. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, you're right, absolutely. I mean, especially, you know, there's territories. I mean, so what? So it's a great habitat, but there's all these, you know, dominant individuals that are going to tear the shit.
And it's not legal to, I mean, to do that. Like, a lot of people don't think it's harmful, but...
Well,
like,
just look what happened. All these people with, you know, these crazy-ass snakes that have released into the, you know, the Everglades. I mean, it's not just the python, which has had a huge effect. I mean, all the mesocarnivores like, well, possums and let's see, what else? Well, they're eating alligators, they're eating, what other kind of mesocarnivores? Raccoons, all that. Those things are disappearing because of the python. But they thought, well, it's too big for me now. You know, it was nice when it was 6 feet long, but now it's 12 feet and it might eat me. And so they just, and there's actually a lot of people who've done the same thing with venomous snakes. I mean, they're always finding cobras out there now.
I think like the lionfish, which is a saltwater,
right?
You know, it's not from here, and
no.
People have them as pets, and then put them out back in the
I know.
In the environment, and they're
step
top
on
predators.
And it's not very pleasant. So no, I know. I mean, but the crazy stuff is, God, all these people in Florida. There's a lot of nuts that want to have venomous snakes for some reason. I don't know. They're exciting, you know. It's all about death and all that. And then they finally, you know, say, well, it's too difficult, or they die or something. And so instead of taking them somewhere like to animal control, they just release them. A bloody venomous snake, you know. There's venomous snakes down there, but there's no, like, cobras down there, or there's no black mambas down there. I mean, shit, that'll kill people right away. So, I know, it's nuts. Anyway, any questions, just email me, or you can come in whatever you want.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure, see you, Vanessa. Okay. Okay, let's see here.